Okay, welcome to the first mid-cycle for Cinder. So we're at week R minus 18. All right, so the Etherpad's being shared, so you can see it in the recording. Everybody else, probably do the usual thing, open the Etherpad separately so you can follow along in there, and not have to see the screen share. Okay, so we got, all right, so the business. So you may have noticed the lower constraints job broke. Sure when exactly, but it was a while. It was apparently due to an upgrade in pip, and the latest pip is actually has a new resolver that's much stricter about resolving constraints. And so basically what was happening was it was detecting inconsistent constraints more strictly. So the way I fixed it is, and this is what, so let me paste well, you can see the link in the Etherpad. But if you open up that link on line 33, you can see it's this enormous thing. Thanks for Eric for looking it over. What I wound up doing was, Walt had started working on this yesterday, I think, in the morning, because we thought it was just one or two things. But as each one got fixed, something showed up. So I went and looked at our requirements and lower constraints, and they were like, the lower constraints were like remarkably low. So like in some cases, 2 or 3 major versions different. So what I did was I went to a recent unit test job that I run and just did a pip freeze in there and saw what we were actually using. So that's the source of this. And you'll notice, I mean, if you go and look, some of these are already lower than released versions of stuff, but at least this brings us into reality. I need to talk to Sean or somebody about the lower constraints job and what exactly it's supposed to do. My impression was that it's supposed to be a help to packagers to know what's the lowest we recommend them using. Now, Eric has pointed this out a while ago that the versions we're actually testing with are pretty recent, right? Because it's basically up to whatever the current upper constraints are is what's actually being run in there. So saying that so anyway, the lower constraints job only doesn't install to see if it can install it, and then it runs the unit tests. So it doesn't give us any, it's right, so it's not running with integration, it's not running with any of the Tempest stuff, doesn't run our functional jobs. So I think it's important to try to keep these, updated. So anyway, so we may need to do something like, I don't know, at milestone 2 of every cycle, just bring the constraints up to, current releases, just so it give us, a little bit of time to shake any problems out. But that's the basic idea. So if you look through here, it's a big change. So I'm bringing it up in case it appears it hasn't broken anything yet, but that's always possible. So, but the other thing I think is maybe we need a policy so that if you're working on something, so like the versioned objects or something, I think sometimes, right, you need a new feature. So in that case, you have to update the constraints. But it might be a good idea if you're using any library to just check what we're currently requiring and see how close it is to what the latest release is. Or we can try to figure out a way to automate this. But so anyway, that's just an explanation of why this patch is so big. Because I just got tired of trying to do a whack-a-mole thing and figure out which were the key ones. But the other thing is really, I want to at least say that our recommended lower constraints are something that we've actually tested with at some point. So there we go. Now the other thing is we also have constraints in setup.cfg for the drivers. And so I didn't change those on this patch because I just didn't want to deal with that. So I guess I should send this out to the mailing list because there don't seem to be a lot of people here. I'd like people who have drivers who have something in that file should check the versions. I think the WebSocket client and the PyOpen SSL are kind of out of date, and I'd like to pump those up. But I'd like the driver people to be aware of that, so that because the CIs have been flaky, so I don't know that if I just put up a patch, I'm going to get any useful information about whether it breaks one of the drivers or not. So I'll probably bring that up again at the next weekly meeting. So anyway, take a look at this. Just be aware, almost all our requirements, I think there may be like 4 lines in that file that weren't changed, have been upped. So it's possible that this might cause a problem somewhere. So please keep an eye out and be aware of that. Any questions or observations? Okay, that's good. All right, we got the quick look at the bug review. Michael couldn't be here today, but he did put up the Etherpad of bugs. Which,
I guess he fell offline.
Yeah, he quits our IRC as well.
hey, sorry, my system crashed. So, I hope you were having a productive meeting in my absence. Okay. Geez. All right, sorry. So anyway, take a look at the bugs, and I want to get on to some other stuff. So thanks for Michael for putting this together. And sorry, I'm getting my windows back open. All right, so what I need for Christmas is some time to update Fedora, apparently. Okay, so we got some releases out. Thanks for Jot. Train, oh, maybe it's been approved. Somebody updated that.
It's been merged. Yeah, I updated it.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right, so the train gate's been flaky. Somehow Eric had a patch up that fixed, what was it, encrypted clone volumes. So it was kind of important to get that backported. Somehow that slipped past the gate problems, which is nice, but we have a couple of patches, so we may be doing another release in a week or so when we get that stuff sorted out. But at least we've got, you know, some up-to-date releases in our stable branches. Next question is, right, the last meeting of the month we do on video. So my question is, what should the last meeting of December be? I don't know what people's vacation schedules are or if they'll be around. So next week we'll definitely have a meeting. Week after that's 23rd of December, and then the week after that's the 30th of December. So they're not quite holidays, but they're close enough that I'm anticipating there might not be much participation. So I guess the question is, I guess starting with the 30th of December, how many people aren't going to be attending that meeting or think we should cancel it? That's also.
I'm not.
You won't be there? Okay, so Eric's down.
I won't either.
Okay. Lucio?
I can do it.
Yvonne, you can? Okay. Rajat?
I can also join.
Okay, and then how about the 23rd of December? Is everybody?
Sounds good.
I'm out that week.
Both are good for me.
I think I misunderstood the previous question, Brian. I thought you were asking the 23rd.
Oh,
In the
okay.
previous question.
That's okay.
So
All right.
I will be around next week, and I will not be on the 23rd.
Okay, that's fine. I'm thinking let's make the 23rd the last meeting of this month then. I mean, Gorko can't be there, sorry, but that's okay. We'll assign him some tasks or something just to. All right, so we can formalize this next week. I just wanted to get a sense. So I'm thinking I'm going to cancel the 30th December meeting. So the 23rd will be our last meeting of the month and would be on video. Yes. Okay. Let me just. All right, and then just for your calendars, right? So the 18th of December, so a little more than a week from today is a spec freeze. So that's what we'll be doing a spec review later. And then milestone 2 is the 21st of January. So that's the new driver merge deadline. So just be ready for a lot of review requests because we got the Kioxia team. We got Walt's iSCSI driver that needs to get in. That's mostly ready. So anyway, so just be aware of those dates. Okay, let's move on to.
Sorry, does that apply to USB connectors as well?
I'm sorry?
I was wondering if the new driver deadline applies to USB as well. So for USB connectors.
Right. I don't know. What's our.
Is there a deadline? Or?
I don't think there's an explicit. Right, OS Brick has to be released earlier. I'm not sure what the actual. Let me check the date of that.
But there is an implicit dependency there. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't merge the Cinder code, if I remember correctly, if we don't have a CI, and you cannot have a CI if you don't have the OSBRIC code merge, right?
Well, I think Lucian, right, is working on the Windows thing. I don't think it requires a driver change. Is that right? It's just a connector change.
Yeah. I mean, we do have minimal Hyper-V driver change so that we let it know that there is a USB connector that it can use, but that's it. There are just like 5 lines of code.
See.
But on the Cinder side, there's no driver change.
Oh, if there is no driver change, as far as I know, the driver, the OS break is with library freeze. That's the
Yeah. So that's R
Deadline.
-6. So it's the week of March 1st is that we have to
Nice.
release OS Brick. So I'd aim for like give us a little more time than that. I wonder if we should anyway, so I'd aim to get it done 15th of February if you can.
Okay.
Because that'll yeah, I think that's probably reasonable. Does that answer your question?
Yep, definitely.
All right. Okay, thanks. All right, great. Anything else? General business kind of stuff? All right, cool. All right, main topic to talk about is the API v2 removal that Yvonne is heading up. Is he just non-videoed or did he get kicked off? No, he's here. Okay, good. All right, what I want to do is sort of task out what we need to do to make this happen. Because as everybody knows, it's dragged on. It's partially been my fault because I thought I should have a list of everything that needs to happen so that we can do it. And I just haven't been able to get that done. So I think right now we can just go through, think about what has to happen and task things out so that we have people who are working on particular things. So the first thing is looking at other projects that are using V2. Okay, so Test Horizon, Innova, Landscapes. Disabled Cinder V2. So I think to do that, what would we do? Just put up a patch that removes the ability to set V2 in DevStack?
Not actually,
Okay.
because probably, as I remember, Nova uses Cinder V2 as minimal version, and DevStack setups V2 by default. We can't configure it, so we have to test our patches against that project to verify if everything will work or not.
Okay.
Because when we removed V1, our tests and gates were good. DevStack gate was good, but we broke Nova and Glance. So that's
Okay.
why I added this note to test. I hope everything will work, but we need to test it.
So basically,
I tried to propose work in progress patch to DevStack yesterday to not configure V2, and it was in pretty good shape. Grenade failed, but with a different reason that Grenade and Cinder gate, but I just put a recheck, I think hour ago or something like it, and I will update this part with new details. And I did not dig a lot into Grenade failure for Cinder project. It does not look some V2 or V3 specific. At the first glance, it something like Nova loses attachment or something like it, because after upgrade, volume becomes in available state instead of in use. I put rechecked a few times and the result was the same. And the next step for me is try to reproduce this issue on my local end. I didn't do it for Grenade, so maybe I have to do it step by step manually, or if it's possible to run Grenade on my virtual environment with DevStack, I will do it.
okay.
That's my short update for it.
All right, great. Thanks. So I think, so to test Horizon Nova glance gates, I guess what we do is just put up a patch to each of those that basically does nothing, but will trigger the gate and make it dependent on yours.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to do that or do you want me to do that? Why don't
Yes,
I
I
do
will
that?
do it.
Oh, you'll do it? Okay. Okay. So we got, let's, and then I guess as far as Tempest goes, Tempest must be okay if our gates pass with the dev stack change. Is that right, Luigi?
Okay, can I hear? Okay.
Yeah.
So we cannot remove Tempest support from Tempest because Tempest supports also older version of OpenStack. But that's not a problem anyway, because by default, the volume V2 tests are not enabled. You explicitly need to enable one variable, and there is a specific job which is testing V2. So it's just a matter of removing that job.
Okay. So we have to, okay. So that, where, so does that job live in the, is it part of the Tempest gates that you're talking about, or is it does it live elsewhere?
It's in the Tempest gate. It's Tempest Cinder V2 API. I will reference it somehow.
Okay. So I need to put up a patch removing that job. No. What? All right, let me talk to G-Man about how to do this. All right, so I'll take an action item for that. Okay, so it's basically we disable a variable and it doesn't run anymore, but they probably still want to run it. We'll just have to run it against older cinders. Okay. So Tempest. Okay, and then grenade, Yvonne's going to look into. Okay, thanks, Luigi. And then we got the Horizon gates. Okay. Any, as long as we're sort of brainstorming here, any other project impacts that we need to worry about that anybody can think of? Okay. I guess.
Maybe, maybe rally and arbitrage, but I'm really not sure.
And I guess I should
They
give
use
the
a lot of
OpenStack.
project.
Okay. Thinking maybe the OpenStack client and OpenStack SDK need a heads up so that they can adjust their testing, because they'll need to support V2 for older stuff, but it's going to
Yes,
suddenly.
good point.
All right, so I'll notify them. And then, is there anything to worry about for like heat, or is the Puppet thing still a thing? For OpenStack Ansible, or do they? I guess I could just send out a general thing to the mailing list, just say, we're serious, it's going to be gone. Please make adjustments, and just hope everybody pays attention. So there was an announcement earlier about removing V2 support from the Python Cinder client this cycle. So it shouldn't be a complete surprise that we're removing V2 from Cinder, but I'll make that explicit. Okay, so as far as notifying or impact on other projects, pretty much. Okay, I'm sure there's going to be something that'll break, but we've got the major stuff covered, so I think we're good. Okay. All right, so the next question is about how much V2 code we have to remove. My worry about this is, if you poke around inside the REST API code, the way it's structured, a lot of V3 depends on the contrib stuff and V2. So I don't know that we want to, right, so we can't just delete the V2 directory, is what I'm saying. And I don't know how much refactoring we want to do this cycle, because I'm worried about stuff breaking. So I'm thinking, as long as we remove, I think this is possible, we just remove support for the V2 endpoint from the REST API and leave the classes there. Let me put it this way. Here's my proposal. So what I think we should do, remove the V2 endpoint so that when you install Cinder, you get 404s if anybody tries to use V2. As far as the internal classes go, I think we need to review the V3 test coverage to make sure that it looks good. Well, anyway, so my thought is just, I imagine there's a lot of tests for V2 that cover things that we ignore in V3, just through entropy. So what I think we need to do is update the V3 tests to make sure we have good coverage, and then do the refactoring to get rid of the V2 classes. Or I suppose we could keep them around, but that's probably not good software engineering practice. So the problem with this proposal, of course, is reviewing the V3 tests is a thankless task. So nobody's gonna want to do it unless we're forced to. But anyway, because we also have a similar situation in the Python Cinder client, where removing V2 is going to make a mess. And I definitely want to remove V2 support from there this cycle. Anyway, anybody have any thoughts about this?
I really like your proposal. It's careful to not break anything, and it sounds reasonable to me to remove endpoint now, to not to block any future V2 deployment or usage in Cinder without code modification. And yes, unit test is a big concern, and somebody or even few of us or your contributors right now have to review test coverage case by case, because we can't do it in any automatic way.
Okay. Yeah, and we can think about how we want to do the refactoring, because this is probably a really bad idea. We could rename V2 to like vCommon or something and just keep all those classes. I don't know that that's a good thing to do, though. But anyway, I think it's something we can deal with in the next cycle. We're taking on some technical debt, but I think given the size of the team and all right. So I think this is the way to go. So is there anyone here who's interested in removing the V2 endpoint from the REST API? Who wants to take that on explicitly?
I can do it once I figure out what's going with our grenade and desktops, because we
Okay.
can do it earlier.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then the all right, we'll see how the cycle goes as far as enhancing V3 test coverage. So I guess I'll announce this at the next Cinder meeting. We'll just have a general thing. If you get bored and want to do something in Cinder, you can check the V3 API test coverage and make sure the tests are improved. Okay. All right. And then with the Python Cinder client, all right, sorry, let me back up. So is there anything else? So plan is we remove the REST endpoint for V2. Is there anything else we need to be aware of that we need to do to Cinder itself?
Maybe we have to check our documentation. I don't know if we got the similar documentation for V2 and V3 without micro versions.
Okay. Okay. So all right, I'll take that on. All right. So we can remove the V2 API reference, and then it's just a matter of looking at the other documents and making sure that they're referring to V3 when they're talking about anything, which I think most of them work in terms of the client, so that should be it. Okay. I don't want to hog all this. Does anybody want to remove the V2 API reference? Okay, I guess I will hog this. All right.
I can do it, Brian.
Okay, or we can split it up. I'm thinking you were a prime candidate because this is going to impact a lot of your API reference tests.
I need to check if they mostly run on V3, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, so let's put that as a separate item because we will need to. Okay. All right, let me take my name off. So we've got to remove the API reference. We've got to okay, thanks. All right, so the documentation. With our Cinder Tempest plugin is branchless, just like Tempest is. So we probably need to. All right, so there may be some impact on the Cinder Tempest plugin. Well, all right, so I'll take the action because I guess depending on how Gman proposes we handle this for Tempest itself, we'll do a similar thing for our Tempest plugin because we'll still want to run. Will we still want to run jobs against V2? I guess we don't Error. All right, I'll think about this some more. Because we're the only ones who use the Cinder Tempest plugin. So I think if we just switch it so it's always running v3, then that's fine. But so maybe I'll put up a patch for that, and then Luigi can correct me if that's incorrect. Okay, and then we got the Python Cinder client. So it's going to be another one of these things where we can't just delete the v2 directory, because a lot of the v3 stuff reuses the v2 code. So I'm not quite sure the best way to approach this one. Is there anybody who's like really interested in the Python Cinder client who would like to take this kind of thing on? Okay.
Just to be clear, we need to remove v2 from Cinder client before client freeze. It will be earlier the feature freeze in Cinder, I guess.
That is a good point. Okay. I think that's M3, I believe, is the client's got to be published, right? Yeah, let me just double check the date on that one. Yeah, it's Wallaby 3, so it's the week of March 8th. Okay. 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 Yeah, I guess somebody's just going to have to, whoever takes this on is just going to have to dig in and see what happens. I think with the, I know the CLI classes are all intertwined. I don't know about the, right, just the general client. Well, all right. So this is going to be important. All right. So yeah, so this the first step with that's going to be somebody's going to have to sort of map out the strategy for doing this for the Cinder client, and then maybe there'll be small enough tasks that people will be interested in doing them. All right. But we got till the beginning of March. So, okay. So, okay. Any observations or comments people want to make about this? Okay. So I think it's important to do this finally. So there we go. All right, go team. Let's remove V2. Okay. Any final questions or observations? Okay. Now I believe the recording continued while my system had crashed. So because this recording light's flashing, so hopefully that's the case. Okay.
Yeah, it's recording.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
By the way, I joined.
Yes. Hey Jay. Greetings. Okay. All right. Next topic is consistent and secure policies. So this is a little bit of a wild card. So basically what's happening is a couple of cycles ago, Keystone introduced more default roles that come pre-installed when you install Keystone, plus scoping. And so what this has done is it gives you a way to assign roles to users, but also assign scopes within which they can use the roles. And then combining those together, it gives you more flexibility. So that sounds great. Nova has actually converted their policies to supporting this, and there's a push to get everybody else to do it. So that's what this is about. So what I wanted to do was, we didn't have something like this previously. This is a matrix that just shows how our default policy setup works. So the whole aim of this, or the goal, is to make it easier for operators to configure things. So this supports a range of common use cases. What's going on here? But I guess to look at it, you're probably going to want to, everything's moved. I got to find my Zool job. You'll probably want to actually look at this thing in the HTML version, because it gets really hard to follow as a list. All right, so let me give you a link, artifacts. Then Lance is here if anybody's got questions. I think the main point, I've looked at this and Rajat's looked at this. There are a couple of questions, I guess, but they're more Cinder questions, Lance, than general questions. Let me find this thing and stop talking. Configuration. So let me, I should give a link to the, okay. So if you want it, the generated version is here. So, and thanks. So Lance updated. So the scoping was in Queens, the default roles were in Rocky. So we're really kind of behind with getting these to the point where you can actually use them. So combining the roles and the policies, you get these different personas. So you can just describe, common people who interact with Cinder. And then we want to describe what they can do. So the main thing is we're proposing, so Keystone implements 3 scopes. We're just going to do 2. So the one that's missing here is domain scope. So I'm not even going to talk about that. So we got project scope and system scope. And the idea is that if you have system scope, then you can act on the actual system itself. And so basically do everything that the normal admin would be expected to be able to do. But in addition to that, we've got this reader role, so that somebody can have somebody who's got system scope, but only a reader. And then that gives them read-only access to admin capabilities in Cinder. And that's something that a lot of operators want, because they need to have people who can go through and do audits for security or various things without touching anything. And if they can't possibly, so one thing to do that is to make them promise not to touch anything, and you know how that works. So by actually having a system reader, right, that person goes, they can't break anything, all they can do is look. So that's the idea. Now in the project scope, we've got an admin, a member, and a reader. So the member is the way we would typically think of somebody who's a normal user in a project, okay? But we have this project admin now. So the project admin, the way I'm describing it here, and this is what we got to keep in mind, is that, right, it's a person who's a member of the, basically they act as a member of the project, and maybe they have some enhanced abilities. So for instance, the work Rajat did last cycle on the default types, right? That's the kind of thing, it's really safe to say a user can do this and set the default type for their project, because they can't create the types. They have to use types that are there, all they're doing is saying, I want everybody in my project to use this, and everybody in their project can just ignore them and specify whatever type they want to do. So that's a kind of safe action. But we're not going, so a project admin so the other way to look at this is that some of the other services may give the project admin more capabilities than we do. So for instance, Keystone might make it possible for a project admin to like assign roles to users in their project. All right. We don't care about that. I mean, from our point of view, it's just the only kind of stuff will allow a project admin to do that a project member can't do have to be completely safe things by default in Cinder. So that's why, so there are a couple of questions because Rajat was good about bringing these up because I think they illustrate, we got to be really careful when we're talking about a project admin. In no sense, it's just some dude with a credit card in your cloud, right? So you don't want to give them any kind of power to actually do anything that can affect the deployment. So that's the basic idea. So we're calling them a project admin, but really, right, they're not an admin in the old-fashioned sense of like the Cinder admin. So that's just the key point. But it's important to keep that in mind because it's really easy to slip back to, this person needs to have some kind of administrative powers. We don't want to do that, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so anyway, so at the top of that document, describe that. So please read through it and suggest, right, it's a patch. So just suggest changes. Lance has read through it already, and so has Rajat. Now there are a couple of, and I lost my notes because I didn't put them here. Oh, good. So Rajat's put this up here about the reset status of group snapshot. So I'm looking through, all right. So as you look through this, there's a policy we're going to have to remove, which is the one that was a really great idea like 2 cycles ago, and now it's outdated and useless. But it's the one where we set up, right, somebody put up a patch to make the encryption, the different encryption CRUD operations separately configurable, and we weren't sure anybody really wanted to do that. So we had this general policy that became the default for those things. We can't do that now because we have to be able to separate out the reader functions from any kind of mutable function. So that's the basic thing. So that's going to have to change. I'll put up a patch to do that. And there are a couple of other administrative type things that were admin only at some point where we just have one policy to govern all the CRUD operations. So we have to split those up so that the reading stuff is separate. And I guess the question we can discuss on the patches for that, whether we need to be looking through our policies. Some of them are really fine-grained. So like there's a separate policy for listing as opposed to, so like listing all volumes as opposed to reading a particular volume. I don't know that we need to do that, but sometimes we do. So it's one of those things where, well, anyway, we'll think about it and we can discuss that in the patch. So they're noted in here, hopefully, obviously, where we're going to have to make some changes. All right. Now, one thing Rajat noticed, and I believe it's on the Etherpad right now. All right. So Rajat noticed that the policy for resetting the status of a group snapshot is admin or owner. And when we looked at so that was introduced, well, what was introduced? Admin or owner was introduced when this went to be a policy in code. But the old policy that was in the original JSON file was admin only. So the key question here is whether I couldn't find any notations on the patch that changed this, that this had been discussed. So we're wondering whether it was just an oversight or whether it's intentional to allow an admin or owner to do this operation.
I think that's probably a dangerous thing to do because so I had the spec out there that Rajat, I think, was working on some about not Rajat, somebody was helping with about the reset state work to let it be a safer API and not let you do things that you probably don't really want to do. But since we haven't done that yet, if you allow a non-admin to set the state of something like a group snapshot, I mean, they could set it to something like creating and cause some really weird thing to happen where they end up with like more snapshots that get created again when you restart the service, or who knows what. We probably really don't want to just allow someone to do that because they're the owner of the object without having a bunch of restrictions on what they can actually do.
Okay, that's that makes sense. So I think what we need to do then, let's file a bug for this, and then I think we need to change the current. All right, let's file a bug for this independently of all this other stuff and fix it right away. So we'll file a bug for this, change the policy to admin only. Maybe I'll just take this on and do this. Write a release note saying that, and then I want to backport it as far as we can, because I think this is probably not a good thing to have exposed. Just hopefully nobody knows they can do it. And so that's why people haven't been. But of course, as soon as we have a release note that says you used to be able to do this and you shouldn't, that's the way it goes, right? So I don't know. I don't think it's a security issue. Well, it's too late because now we're discussing it in public. So
it's probably not, but
yeah,
it's probably, you know,
it's just a bad experience overall because you're gonna have some weird cleanup and some weird support calls. Okay, and then it's always possible if people prefer it open, right? They can configure it that way. All right, so let me oh good, somebody's taking notes. Thank you. All right, so I'll do this. Or as applicable is probably Queens, right? Because I think that's where the policy and code stuff happens. So. All right. Has Queens gone end of life yet? No. I think anyway. All right. As far as possible. Okay. All right. Then there were a couple of other things. I'm sorry. I should be more. I guess my excuse is my system crashed and I lost all my windows that were open. Man, where's Oh, okay. The other thing that we came across was volume type access. All right, so I clearly need to put headings in here so you can actually navigate this. So it's just. Okay, so if you just search for volume underscore type underscore access, you get to some policies. So we're gonna have to revise. This is one of those where everything, well, gets and posts are together, so I have to split those out. So, right. So the question was whether this is a candidate for, well, the post, right? Yeah, sorry. So as far as the project admin goes, I think we do not want to allow them to give themselves access to any of the private volume types. First thing, they can't discover them unless somebody else tells them about it, I guess, and gives them the UUID. But the other thing is I don't know, right? The point of having these things is, right, the operator creates them for specific purposes, and I don't, right, so I don't know, like in CERN, they may have one group that's very responsible, so they give them a volume type that's going to let them do more stuff, and you don't want all the other physicists to be using that. So I think we don't want to allow that. As far as removing the volume type access, I guess that would be safe. But on the other hand, I think by default, we want the operator to control this, not the project. So that's my idea. Anyway, if you have an opinion about that, you can respond on the review. But Rajat identified this as something that it might make sense to have a project admin do. But I think by default, we want the operator to control access to volume types. And so we only allow system scope on this.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I
And it's
agree
more
with that.
consistent
And it is true what Rajat said, that maybe in some cases a project owner can actually want to do it, but I think the same default would be what you were suggesting.
Okay.
And if in those cases they can modify the defaults.
Yeah, I mean, I think if a cloud wants to have trusted projects, then they can do it. But I think by default, we don't want to get into the business of doing that. So I think the key thing to keep in mind is every time we talk project admin, we just mean some dude showing up in your cloud with a credit card, or a credit card number actually, and who knows what they're going to do. So okay, thanks. Okay, and then there's a question about, I'm not sure, this isn't, let's see, timeline. Interesting, Rajat brought up a question. So on patch set 3, for migrate a volume to a specified host, there's a question about retyping and I forget what the,
Migrating should only be system admin.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we lost him. We lost him again. Yeah, because here you need to know your backend, and like Brian said, we should think of a project owner as someone in the cloud with just a credit card. So in that scenario, they should not even know what your backend is.
Correct.
And they should not be able to move your workload, your data forcefully that way.
Yeah, so my question was that if a migration operation is system admin, then what about retype? Like retype is admin or owner. So in some cases retype doesn't do a migration, but in the cases when the retype does a migration, then should we allow a owner project a normal user to do it?
Yes. Yes, because the way that a system administrator controls what the end user can do is based on the types they have access to. So, and that is how they don't need to have any specific information on the actual host that are doing the operations, that they just move in a higher abstraction layer, which are the volume types. So usually if a user has access to 2 different volume types, even if they require migration, they are allowed to do it. They will have to pass the parameter to let the system know that they are aware that there is going to be a performance penalty probably on the move, and that's it.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Gorka. All right, and sorry for disappearing again. I'm not eligible for a refresh for another 11 months. But okay. All right, I think those were the. Was there any other open questions, Rajat, that struck you? So this matrix is huge, but I wanted to get it done so we could agree on how these personas are supposed to work so we can have something to measure against our tests. And I also wanted this to be something that gets committed and isn't in a wiki or something, so that in order to change stuff, we actually have to post, right? So people just can't do it. We got to actually post a patch to change the way things are supposed to work. So that should add a little bit of sanity to this whole thing. But that's the theory. I think that was everything I had about that.
I think, Brian, there was one policy with, I don't think that's very important, but it was having tenant in the policy name. And you said it's also an attribute that is returned on the volume response. So
Yeah, right. So, right. I don't know, Lance, you can tell me how many cycles ago this happened, but right in the beginning when there was like, Diablo, everybody talked about tenants. And then at some point we started talking about projects. But there's tenant language scattered all over the place. And unfortunately, one of them, so Rajat pointed out that we got a policy that says tenant, maybe we should rename it, which we can do because there's facilities built into Oslo policy so that you can do that kind of thing. But the problem is it's tied to one of these OS dash whatever in the contrib API. So it shows up having tenant in the name. So I think let's ignore it for now and deal with it later, because we also have policies that govern project IDs showing up in responses. And those show up as project_ID, I believe. So we'll have to just straighten it out.
The part that's in contrib you were talking about, is that something that we need to still move into the core API and not have it there anymore?
Yeah. So this may be, so I haven't looked into it really closely. I just looked close enough to realize that the item being exposed that it governs also has tenant in the name. So I think it makes sense to have tenant in the policy name since it's going to show up. But yeah, Eric, I think we need to do a review of, because a lot of that OS dash stuff doesn't really need to be there anymore, but it is. But I think,
there's a handful of things I think that were extensions that shouldn't be at this point.
Yeah, so I think, right. No, I agree. And I don't know, I mean, it might make sense to bring that in as a project ID first and then get rid of it. I don't know. We'll have to deal with that. So I think that'll have to happen after we get V2 removed and straightened out. Then we can tackle all the contrib stuff. Because we just have lots of people breaking down our doors trying to contribute extensions to our API. Right. Back in Essex, it looked like everybody was going to be doing that kind of stuff. But that's not the case anymore. Okay. Anyway, this is a big thing that'll be going on in the background as we're doing other stuff. But the main point is, if you have time, I don't know, it's a shitload of policies to read through. So I don't know whether we should break them up. I mean, Joss read through very carefully. Lance read through. I don't know what my worry is. I mean, okay, I think the thing is, as long as I'll read through one last time. As long as they make sense, I think we're okay. But I included, so in that chart, I included the current behavior so that we could just compare it to make sure we're not proposing any kind of radical change in behavior. So I think what we want to have happen is make this a smooth transition, because whether or not an operator actually uses the scoping and the new roles depends on configuration values for Oslo policy. So anyway, hopefully this will be smooth, but we'll have a reference now for how we expect permissions to work in Cinder, and then we can work from there. Okay. Any questions or observations, or is everybody thoroughly sick of this at this point? Okay. Right. So if anything occurs to you, of course, add it to the Etherpad later or bring it up at the next Cinder meeting, and we can work on that. And thanks, Lance, for being willing to I mean, you must be sick of sitting through session after session on all this stuff. Okay, good. Now I can be quiet. Lucian wanted to pick up on, he talked at the last meeting about the RBD OS brick connector for Windows, and I think he had some comments in the Etherpad, but also, is he here? It's a good question.
So,
oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
Hey,
so we ported RBD to Windows, and we'd like to add this OSB connector. We already got some reviews. Thanks a lot for that. One of the concerns was adding some version checks. I'm not sure if you guys are interested in doing that for Linux. So, for example, what Walter was suggesting was reporting back the RBD version that we have on the client side, and being able to make some checks on the Ceph driver side. So anyway, I did add that as well to the USB connector. We are trying to reuse as much as possible the Linux code. So what I did was basically adding a mixin class so that we can stuff in the common code there. We are, yeah.
I wanted to ask some things about the version check stuff, but you can continue if you got something else for the moment.
Oh no, please go ahead.
So I was trying to figure this out when we talked about it at the meeting on IRC, and I'm not sure if I'm just missing something or if we haven't figured this out totally or what, but what exactly is it that we're trying to solve by adding the Ceph cluster version info to the connector info?
I think the main idea there was that we should check if the RBD version that we're using on the client side matches the one that we have on the Ceph side and the Cinder side, the Cinder driver side. So, for example, let's say that I have a Pacific cluster, and maybe I'm using some older RBD connector. That's just so that we can add some warnings or exception on the driver side so that it's easier to debug, I guess. That's the entire thing. I think someone was mentioning the fact that some customers are actually interested in being able to use different Ceph versions, although I'm not sure if that's actually supported. So,
well, I think it is generally supported that the versions don't have to match. So we return the version of the cluster and the connection info, and then the expectation is that the client side is going to check that, or that the volume driver is going to check that?
I think Walter was suggesting to check on the volume driver side.
Okay,
so basically we have the RBD version coming from the client side, and it can be verified on on the Cinder driver side. That's one way to do it. The other way would be to get the, I mean, yeah, we could get the self-cluster version in multiple places. Depends where we want to put this check. But anyway, I think we could do that separately from the Windows commit. That can be something that can be added on top, I guess, because it would be also affecting the Linux one.
So if we want to check on the volume driver, that we're going to check the version of the subcluster or the version of the client?
I think we can check both to see if there's a mismatch. And depending on, I don't know, maybe on some config option.
We can check a lot of stuff. I'm just not really sure if we actually want to, because I'm not sure what kind of problem we're actually solving by doing that.
Yeah, I think it was mostly to improve the user experience in case you have a mismatch that can lead to an error, so that you can raise an exception ahead of time before you get into some weird issues because of the version mismatch. I guess that was the main concern there.
So we're going to have the volume driver say you're not allowed to connect because we don't think you have the right version?
Yeah, I think that was the main idea there. Yeah. I'm not sure if we should do that or not. Anyway.
I don't think we should do that. I think that's just more complicated than it is useful.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense.
I'm not sure we've had one ever that was caused by this kind of mismatch. And I don't know why we want to add logic to check all this stuff, really.
It's okay. Perfectly fine by me. I mean, that was just a question whether we should do that or not. I mean, it's.
Well, I don't know. Everybody.
Should we still report that in the connector properties so that if someone ever wants to add a warning or so, has the means of doing it, or we should just drop it from the USB connector as well?
The problem with adding warnings is that it doesn't. I mean, you end up with log messages that say warning version mismatch, but everyone's just going to use it anyway, which is probably fine. That's what happens today. So I don't know. I'm just not sure what it actually buys us by doing this. I know last week people seem to generally agree on this, so if anybody else has opinions, it'd be helpful. But I think it's trying to solve a problem that we maybe don't really have.
Okay, about the USB connector, should I keep that part or should I drop it for now, or what do you think? It's just adding a field with the RBD version.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Brian, did you have any particular take on Walter's point of view?
No, I'm still. I guess my feeling is it might be good to pass the RBD version in the connector, and then if you want to do something, you can do it. But I'm inclined to agree with you about logging warnings. I really don't know. I haven't thought this through.
I think there would be another advantage in fetching the RBD version. So one idea was switching the CLI that we're currently using. So in order to do that, we have to drop the support for SEF 14, I think. So at some point, we'll have some version checks for sure if we're going to update the code to use the new CLI and so. So anyway, that check will probably be on the voice brick side. It doesn't have to report that version somewhere else. But I guess we can keep that code for the moment which we want to replicate the previous subversions.
I missed that. That's you move to a newer version of the command line you were talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some inline to-dos in the Linux RBD connector, saying that Ceph14 should be deprecated at some point in order to use the newer version of the CLI. So if we have to do that, we'll definitely have some version checks.
Well, that's for the client version and not the server
Yeah.
side.
Yep.
Okay. So that doesn't need to be in the connector info to do that part anyway.
We can just keep those helpers, I guess, without passing it on to the connector properties.
I guess the other question with this is, do we really want to be training anybody that uses OS Brick to connect to volumes to look for version fields and try to have different behavior based on the version of Ceph that's on the other side? That kind of seems like a precedent we don't really want to set, to me.
Yeah, we don't want that, because then we run into the problem of stale connection info. If you have a system running for too long and the data is stored in the database, suddenly you update your Ceph cluster and the connection info stored in the attachments table is old and doesn't have the right version of the cluster anymore.
Yeah,
That's dangerous.
And I would be really surprised if anybody from Nova was interested in changing behavior based on the Ceph version that shows up in this connector.
Yeah, I guess one use case for that would be to use certain features that are only supported by newer subversions, but I don't know if that would be the way to check. Maybe they wouldn't require the connector properties for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of features would show up at that layer. Most of the Ceph cluster feature kind of stuff is negotiated on the driver side and not on the client.
Yeah, good
I don't know. I mean, what I'm getting at is it seems like adding this to the connector info kind of exposes stuff that we usually would want to avoid exposing, and I'm still not seeing what the actual benefit is of doing it. I mean, if we get to the point where there actually are big compatibility reasons that we need this, sure, but I don't think that's happened yet.
Okay, I'll drop it for now and take it from there. Are there any other concerns about the Windows USB connector?
No, I think everybody's generally in support of adding this. So I think this was the main sticking point, was whether we needed to
Have version checks.
Yeah, because so my recollection from last week was that it's going to be impossible to have this problem because, right, you can't install anything other than Pacific on Windows.
Yeah, at the moment.
Okay, so yeah, I guess I'm inclined to agree with Eric's position here then that right, when we have a problem that we need this to solve, then we can introduce it. But right now it's not obvious we get a benefit from it, and it doesn't seem like it's gonna we have another mechanism to prevent this kind of problem, namely that it's impossible to get in this situation right now.
Thanks for the feedback, guys.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for bringing this back. Any observations or comments from anyone? Okay. All right. Thanks, Lucian.
Thanks.
Okay. So let me. All right, and then we've got some specs to look at. All right, so let's take a quick look at the migration support for volume with replication status enabled is short. So I think we can look at it and give some pointers for more info that might be needed. Okay, so the proposal is for allowing migrations across pools in the same backend with replication status enabled. And the reason for the proposal is that there seems to be a check in the volume API that doesn't allow this to happen. And so whether the backend's capable of it or not, we never find out because it's being rejected early. So the proposal is that drivers that can do this should somehow propagate the information up so that in the volume API, we can decide whether it can be done or not. So we can still reject early, but we would accept in the case where the driver is capable of doing this.
How
Yeah.
how does this propose to propagate the information to the Cinder API?
It looks like that's not stated.
Well, that is the big deal, in my opinion. Because right now we are only propagating it to the scheduler, not there. And also I think it's important to state that it should be the other way around. It should not be drivers that cannot support it, the ones that make it explicit, but the other way around, the ones that support it should be saying, I do support it, because that way we make sure that all the drivers that we are backward compatible, because this is something that drivers didn't have to worry about up till now. So we should assume that the drivers don't
cannot.
support this.
Right. Okay.
I understand that
Yeah.
most drivers will do the right thing. It will work fine and everything because they will be checking the volume type and creating the new volume properly. But it's dangerous just to assume. So
Right.
I feel more comfortable if we assume that they are not doing it right, only on the off chance that they don't.
Okay.
This is replication, and you don't want to find out when you need it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. So it's still.
Hey Brian,
Of
there's
course.
a
Oh, hey, Amar.
Yeah, sorry.
I have a point to add. So if you consider the multi-attach proposal, what we have seen that if they are having two controls, like if we set up a volume type with multi-attach as a true as a flag, and the driver has has a parameter that has a configuration is set to true, then scheduler decides whether to allow the multi-attach or not. So in the same way, we just want to enable from the API level for the replicated volumes to get migrated. So it's just a question that how could we like get the info of the driver whether it's replicated or not to the API? Yeah. So what was his setting regarding that scheduler part is checking, right? So I would agree with that, but we want to know that how we could implement in that way to this feature.
I think there is a difference because when we do multi-attach, it's some creation time when you have to say that you want a volume that you want to be able to do multi-attach. Whereas for the retype, you just ask for a retype, not a retype that also is allowed to move between pools. At least not with the current code. We could add a new extra spec that besides saying, yeah, I want this to be replicated, you could say, I also want it to support replicated migration, pool migration or whatever. But I think that may be a little hawkish. No.
Yeah, I was just looking regarding the problem description of the multi-attach. The description states that they have proposed to solve the spec to simply enable the ability from the API level, so that the driver has a control whether to decide allow the multi-attach or not. In the same way, if we have a chance to propose this feature from API, the driver at the driver end they will be deciding, right? They will be allowed or basing on the flag. They can allow it or they can disallow it from the flag. I just want to propose is that if we have a control for the driver to decide to allow the migration or not, as the same as multi-attach, it can be done.
But the multi-attach you're describing right now, it's a new spec? Or is the current code?
It is in the current code and it's from the Queen's release, I think. Yeah.
But as far as I know, when you do a multi-attach, you have to define it when you create the volume, right? The support.
Yeah, yeah.
Not when you do the attachment, which is
Yeah, I have
completely different, because the creation goes from the API to the scheduler, and where it gets rejected, it's in the scheduler. What this spec is proposing is rejecting it at the API.
API, yeah.
Which is different. The other one is rejecting it at the scheduler, not at the API. So the alternatives are we either propagate the scheduler information to the API nodes, which I think is going to drive everybody crazy, or we add some kind of synchronous call in the scheduler, where you can either query or you can send a request and receive a reply instead of being async like we do now, where you just say, hey, migrate this thing, and at the API layer you just forget about it. We could add a new API where we make it a synchronous call, but just up to the point where the scheduler has completed the operation, not up to the point where the migration has completed. So it could go like this. You make the request to the API makes the request to the scheduler and waits for a response. The scheduler schedules it, sends it asynchronously to the volume service, and then replies to the API saying, everything is fine, I have found a driver that likes your request, you can return to the user. That is an alternative we could do without needing to propagate the information to the API. It would require a new migration and everything, but it is possible. I don't know if I was able to explain it properly.
Yeah, I got the inference. Yeah.
Okay. Alternatively, we could. Would it be terrible to get the error or or via a user message instead of directly at the API call?
Not sure actually. So we were trying this functionality by giving a check basing on this driver specified spec. So we have already proposed that. I think you have seen that in the previous meetings. I think so.
Yes, yes. You clarified a lot of this to me because I was confused, and you clarified this. So yes, you were right. This is an API flag that we're checking.
Yeah.
But we can either move it to the scheduler, or we can just return a user message in the scheduler and keep everything.
But the call isn't coming to scheduler, right? So that's the main challenge. If you want the control is stored at the API, right? Yeah. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, but that could be moved. We did it, for example, for snapshots. We used to create a snapshot directly to the volume service because we already knew what the volume service was going to handle it. But then we run into some cases we're running into space problems, things like that. So we started redirecting those to the scheduler, so they would no longer go directly to the volume.
You're moreover like you're screening at the screening part is taking the scheduler. Yeah.
Exactly. Because that is where we have all the information. And that is basically its responsibility to doing that kind of a screening of the internal driver information.
So that would be the alternative for this then. Yeah.
In general, I'm okay doing this at the scheduler. I'm not in favor of checking these kind of things at the API level.
Yeah, it would affect the other drivers. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for that. Yeah.
So then,
If possible, you could share that snapshot creation issue what you're talking about regarding implementation, so I could look around that and try to come up with something.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
I will look into the Git commits and paste the reviews in the
Thanks,
Etherpad.
Thanks,
Yeah,
I
no
appreciate
problem.
it. Thank you. Thank you.
all right, thanks.
Thanks,
Gordon.
Brian. Yeah.
I guess the only question I've got is if we allow, are we going to be flooded with failures that are going to be reflected in user messages now? Because most backends don't support this, or
no, I don't think this we are going with the user message mechanism. Okay. Since we are going to make a change.
Okay. Right. Okay. The scheduler is going to respond right away, and then we can. Okay.
I think that could be nicer from a user's perspective.
Yes. Right. Okay. I was misunderstanding that. All right. No, that sounds like a good strategy. Okay. All right. Thanks, Amar.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a quick look. Rajat's got a spec up for storing volume format information. Type. Rajat, do you have any questions, or is it mostly you need people to look at it?
Yeah, am I audible now? Because my
Yes.
mic was. So I want to say a few things about this. So it's based on the originally proposed spec. It was a long time ago, and also I've did some modifications with respect to the code I've been doing and the testing I've been doing on this. So basically, I've included the feature like I have included the format info and the format info affecting some operations like an extend operation or a clone operation. So few operations I've included. If anyone wants to like enable it for other operations, I can do that. So it's in the work items. And one other question I had regarding is, so I think we want to return it in the API response because Nova and Glance would require it. I'm not sure where exactly. So that's also like one point I'm confused about. So
yeah, I think we need to return it in the attachment API, but I don't think we want to do it for volume show. I think that's not the right place to display this in the just normal volume detail. Because we don't really show anything there that's about how do you actually connect to and open the volume.
yeah, it makes sense for Glance also. Like, yeah. So one more thing I want to say is like next week I will be on holiday and I just saw that there is a spec freeze next week. So yeah, if there are reviews next week, then obviously I will update it. but I would appreciate if there are reviews this week, then I can do it faster, like complete it this week.
So I guess, Eric, you're thinking we can store this in the admin metadata, but only expose it in the attachment API.
Yeah. And I'm still not 100% sure, just because I haven't gone and tried to answer this question yet, if volume admin metadata is one sensible place to put it. I think there's one or two other places that we also could put it, and it wasn't real obvious to me how to tell which one was the right place. But I'm trying to remember, because don't we also have some, like, I don't know. I guess admin metadata makes sense. I'm not opposed to it. I was just trying to figure out if that was the only place to put it, or if there was some other place.
For
Because
example,
I
for
was thinking
SMB, we are using the connection properties. We're just
well, I'm
passing
talking
the
about
format to
where
them.
on the Cinder side. I think it makes sense to put it in the admin metadata, though. It's still kind of strange because then it shows up for admins who have to know that they're not supposed to just go like change this field, which, since it's admin only, is not a huge concern, but it's not really clean because it's not, it's metadata about the driver and the backend. It's not metadata that the admin or the user is applying to the volume. So we're kind of overloading what those fields are for by putting it there. It's really like system managed metadata and not admin managed metadata.
Yeah, I can see that.
I thought that the admin metadata was not in terms of who was going to be using it, but who had visibility access to it. That's what my understanding of that field was, right?
Well, I assume
So
admin
anything.
can change it, right?
Well, I came on later than you to a project, so maybe I just misunderstood it. I thought it's basically, if you have a driver, where do they store metadata that they, for their internal use case, admin metadata, because it's only visible for the administrator, and normal users will not be able to play with it, touch it, or see it. I thought that was the purpose of that field, not for admins to, or at least not only for admins to add their own data, but for drivers as well.
That could be the case. I honestly am not totally sure.
I mean, we should probably make sure there's a clear statement of it somewhere, because I agree with, with Gorka's point, to troubleshoot stuff, you're going to have to see these things. But admins will have to know, right, not to monkey with the stuff that the driver has put there for its own use.
Well, it sounds like either way, it would be helpful to just actually document what this table is even for, so that we know what we're talking about with it.
Correct. All right, let's put so it's a side issue here.
I mean, the model appears to me basically that what we're proposing is it's okay if admins can see this field, and we're just going to assume they're not going to touch it and break anything. And yeah, I mean, that works. I don't know that it's how we would ideally design it, but there's not any huge problem with it.
Okay. So now that we've, all right, so it seems like putting it in the admin metadata table seems okay. So that's good. And then Rajat, does exposing this only in the attachment API make sense to you or your use case?
Yeah, so the bug that was originally logged, so in that the glance, it's glance store bug, so glance usually opens the center volume, so attaches and opens, so it's available there. It makes sense for that, fixing that issue.
So the issue, so the issue is that if you're using one of these file system type stores, in order to do normal volume operations, they need to actually put a QCOW2 in there. But as far as the user is concerned, it's not a QCOW2. It's just a volume that they use. And the glance problem is that, oh, I'm sorry.
So the fundamental thing that this is all trying to fix is that if you have volumes or files or whatever, in this case, it's files representing volumes. If you have files that could either be a raw volume or a QCOW2 formatted volume to store raw data inside of the QCOW2, you fundamentally have to keep track of the format of that file to do everything correctly. Because what happens if you don't is you have to look at the file to figure out what it is. But since it can be a raw file, you don't know if you wrote a QCOW2 header there or if the user put a QCOW2 volume inside of a raw volume. And so you have to have a field that tells you that information to actually do everything right. So we get away with this now because we have heuristics that guess based on what is in the file, but there are operations that if you do certain weird things by writing QCOW2 files into raw volumes, certain things will just fail because it'll get interpreted wrong and we'll have to handle it safely and just bail on doing whatever we were trying to do because we don't know what we're doing with it.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically the issue was that Glance was writing a QCOW2 image into a volume and Cinder thought it's a QCOW2 volume. So Cinder was performing an extend operation thinking it's like the extend operation depends on an auto detection of format. And since the Glance image's QCOW2 header was in the volume, so it assumed it was a QCOW2 volume and it did the extended operation wrongly. So we keep a track of the format here and specify that Glance wrote a QCOW2 image into a raw volume. So in the extend command, like now we specify the format -f raw. So it works.
So to Lucian's question on chat there, yeah, we can use the initialized connection is where we would provide the format info to whoever's connecting to it. But the hard part is keeping track of what the format actually is, because since we use QCOW2 to implement snapshots for file system drivers, you have scenarios where if you can create a raw volume and create a snapshot for that volume, and then if you delete it while it's attached to an instance, the previously raw volume can change to a QCOW2 volume, and you have to record that somewhere in Cinder so that you know that it's now a changed format, so that the next guy connecting to it, you can tell, that it's a QCOW2 file, which also touches on something we were talking about earlier. I don't know if there's a risk of something weird happening with this. We've seen bugs, I forget around what. We've seen bugs in the past around file system-based drivers with Nova persisting connection info about the files. And I wonder if this is another place where we need to make sure we're not going to cause a problem there. If they persist that it's a raw volume and then it changes to a QCOW2, but they didn't update that or whatever. That will eventually get handled by Lee's refresh connection API or whatever it's called, but that's not been done yet.
Okay, so the way we're ending this is we'll store it in the admin metadata, we'll expose it in the attachment, and then, so Nova can change this from, right, under certain circumstances, Nova would make the change from it being raw to QCOW2.
Yeah, that can happen when you delete snapshots and they're done by libvirt and the Nova side. So when that happens, the current model is that Cinder already kind of knows that that's the outcome of that operation. And in this change, it'll have to be smart enough to know to, go update the field in the database when it needs to, when that snapshot deletion has occurred.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done that in the code.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? So, Rajat, do you have enough to work on to revise the spec?
Yes, thank you for the feedback.
Okay, and then we'll try to review it as quick as we can. We're getting close to the end. Is there anyone else here who's got a spec who would like some discussion on it before we just pick up the next one? Okay, sounds like I know Raphael was here, but he was in IRC and my IRC crashed. He's got the patch up for the new micro version. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I don't think it's got a spec. So I think it's mostly a request to review. Okay.
Am I right that this patch currently might be changing the V2 API as well?
It probably is because of when it was proposed. Yeah. So we either have to merge it like really, really fast. What's the best way to handle that?
Well, I'm trying to figure out from looking at it real quick. I guess it doesn't actually change any V2 API responses. I think it's just changing. Well, I don't know, because it has.
I think it passes the context through in a place where it wasn't before, I think, is if I
Well, the
remember
first
correctly.
file there shows that it's changing a V2 response, which is probably wrong. I don't think we actually want to do that.
I'm wondering whether that's from Rebase or something, because it's a group ID, which isn't what's happening here. Or I'm completely confused about which patch I'm looking at. Sorry.
I think you might be right, because I was kind of wondering the same thing.
Yeah, the thing I was thinking of in the V2 views, there is a change because the request has to be passed through, but I think it's only used by the
Yeah, that doesn't actually
yeah,
change
and I
anything.
think now that I'm thinking about it, I think we have to leave that in because of what we decided earlier about removing the endpoint and leaving the code. So okay, thanks. Yeah, so okay, so that's okay. 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 So I think basically this looks fine. I will review it as soon as I can, and we'll need somebody else to also. But I think, sorry, I'm still not used to the Garrett interface to find my old comments, but they're in there somewhere. Okay. All right. We're past time actually for the mid-cycle. I guess cores, please review specs today and tomorrow. So people have an opportunity to make revisions. And then the spec deadline is Thursday or Friday. I forget. It's the 18th. Right. So next Friday is the spec freeze. All right. So let's prioritize Rajat's so that because he showed up today and we know he's going to be away. And then please look at the other ones as you can. Any general comments or concerns before we wrap up today's mid-cycle? All right. I guess the question I've got is the length of the mid-cycle. Since we sort of ran out of time, do we need to do these longer? Something to think about. I guess I'll bring this up at the next meeting. I don't want to make it too much longer because then it's hard to get people to show up because it's suddenly a big block of time. But it seems like 2.5 hours might be better than 2. I don't know. We'll think about that for the next mid-cycle. Any general comments